thank you guys all for coming. So the subject that this talk is supposed to be about, I think, is pretty relevant right now. The current state of comedy. You could always have a panel talking about the current state of comedy ever since I've been in it, and it would be interesting, but never more interesting than I think what's happening right now, because in all my life, I never saw so many comedians taking chances, and I've never seen so many comedians under fire for taking chances. So I know you guys are screenwriters. Are you mostly screenwriters? These are screenwriters, sketch writers, right? If you're not a screenwriter, then hopefully you'll enjoy this. But I want to start by asking our two distinguished panelists. Do you remember the first time you heard something on TV, a movie, stand-up, where you were offended? Or have you ever been offended hearing something that was funny? Could be an uncle saying something, that made you feel uncomfortable. I'm just curious to start talking about the idea of what makes you uncomfortable, what makes people uncomfortable.
Wow.
You want to?
I was born in Canada, and I'm a queer Pakistani Muslim woman. And I was raised in Sydney, Nova Scotia, Canada, which is like Canadian Maine. So there's not a lot of this over there. And so I was very much the only person who, I didn't celebrate Christmas. I was the dark house on the block during the holidays. I ate differently. I looked different. And even when my family moved to the States, I was around mostly people who were not like me. And so I feel like most of my experience growing up has been as an outsider, as an other. And I don't know if this is the first moment, but I will say when I was 17, we moved from Canadian Maine, we moved to the great state of Indiana. I know, it's really sexy. And at 17, it was kind of a shock for me because some of the kids in high school were doing impressions of, and their parents at times too, were doing impressions of my parents.
Wow.
Their accents, and I didn't really understand that my parents sounded like that. And it took me years to really understand the depth of what, I didn't know what a microaggression was. I just knew it felt weird. And it didn't feel good, and it made me feel even more othered than I already felt.
And they thought it was hilarious.
They thought it was hilarious, and they just thought like, oh, well, we are talking to, like, that's our Fawzia's parents. And I was like, what's happening? Is that, what? Like, it was that kind of moment for me. And, a couple kids in school, like, doing some sort of Asian accent towards me. And I didn't understand what that was about. And so, that wasn't my first exposure to what I felt like, oh, comedy is power. But that was a moment that really sticks out for me as something that impacted me. And I was like, I don't like feeling like that, and I don't want to feel like that.
Right.
Again.
No, it's great, and it's fascinating because the people making those jokes thought it was funny.
Exactly.
Which is the root of this whole sort of disconnect between what's funny, what's not funny, and is it okay for them to laugh at that if it's at your expense? Anyway, Michael, similar background.
The whitest man in the world. I'm happy to be here. Weirdly, I partly grew up in Ibadan, Nigeria, and we were Americans in Nigeria, and England had just surrendered Nigeria given it back to the Nigerians, which is, appropriate. I remember, so I was probably 5 or 6, and I remember this drunk British guy coming up to my dad, who was not very funny, my father, but this guy came up to him and said, why don't you go back to Dallas where they shoot presidents? And my father, who was an academic, he was a school teacher, he said, I beg your pardon, we shoot them in Washington, we shoot them in New York. So, he was so very, very smart, but not known, but he did manage to get off a few, but so that was the kind of British people, British colonial people, you know, like the ramifications of that much later that I kind of realized everything that was going on, including the CIA's involvement in Nigeria at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And like a lot of times as a kid you go, oh my God, Johnny Hutchinson's father must have been in the CIA. You know, you kind of like, everything kind of lines up and you go, oh my God. And, but yeah, I guess that would be it.
Right, so there's I guess I'm trying to understand what's going on right now in the country.
Oh, yeah.
I think we all are.
Oh, yeah.
And not to politicize this at all, but this is a sort of very active time for people to react, because the things that are coming at us are so strong, especially marginalized populations and stuff, with the president, you know, speaking as if they shouldn't be here. And so I guess I'm interested to know these sort of young experiences with some sort of marginalization, or which are guised in the form of comedy. You became a lawyer, which is interesting because that was some way to take control of. I mean,
in my case, I became a lawyer probably because I was like, what do you do with your life? How do you avoid getting married? How do you use your liberal arts degree?
Lawyers get married.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, sorry, go ahead.
But no. But so you went from being a lawyer as perhaps a way to please your parents, but also to have control. And then you've started wanting to tell your story. And I'm just curious about, so based on those early experiences of being the other, your work is very much about being the other.
Oh, yeah.
And what was that journey? It's like, as a writer, how did you start thinking about, I'm going to tell a frickin' joke that's going to like show them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was a lawyer. I went to law school at Chicago Kent, and I started taking improv classes and, you know, at night, and learning theater and all that stuff, because I was like, yeah, this makes sense. Lawyer by day, comedy by night. Susan Messing was one of my teachers. It was fascinating because I started acting and performing more, and I'd go in for roles. And you know, granted, it was Chicago. There wasn't as much happening as there is now. Also, the roles and the casting, the way people cast, was really narrow. So even if it was a role for a South Asian woman or a queer woman or a Muslim woman, it still had to be a certain kind of version, a select version of what that identity looks like, in many ways to please the majority's gaze of what that group looks like. So I was like, man, I'm not gay, brown, or Muslim enough, or feminine enough to be exactly what I am. And the roles were really, you know, there were so many like terrorist roles for Muslims.
Oh my God.
And this was when, you know, if you were ambiguously brown, you could go in for you could be like, well, she could be light-skinned black, or she could be Spanish speaking. Like, let's send her in for all of it. You know, you were just like a great asset. Weird. And so I thought, well, these roles aren't representing me, the stories aren't even representing me, maybe I should write. And so, you know, I didn't have that background in writing. I was writing briefs. That sounds as terrible as it sounds, right? That is as terrible as it sounds. And so I just started writing to kind of feel some sort of control and power, and started writing through comedy, like web series, and then short films. Eventually, the feature in 2016, but it gave me power, and not only for myself, but I saw this whole community of people who also were getting cast in a very specific, select way. You know, fantastic comedian, you know, comedy women, actors are only cast in drama spaces, and I'm like, you are so funny, and it's like, yeah, but they don't see me that way. I look like this, therefore they see me like this, and I'm like, I want to cast you better. So creating my own work was also opportunity for myself, but also opportunity for like all of us.
Yeah.
And that way you started writing on your own. Nobody was hiring you. You were just in your...
Nobody was hiring me, y'all.
Nobody asked you to write. You just said, I need to do this.
I need to do this, yeah.
All right, Michael, growing up in Ohio.
Well, I moved
big comedy capital, Ohio.
Yes, right.
Okay.
Ohio, a great place to leave. That's actually on the license.
Yeah.
Great place to leave.
So very early on, you got to SNL. You were a
Yes.
kid. You were a pup.
I was 24, and I think in retrospect, way too young. I think I'm still too young. But it was a wonderful experience. My performing, though, I wanted to say, like at Second City, I worked at Second City for 5 years, and the roles that I was 19 years in LA, and my roles were always the yuppie enemy. You know, like the father who couldn't dance, or that was the way I found my niche. And also at Second City, at least when I was on the main stage, I had to you kind of figure out how it works. And my thing was political and topical. That was, and it wasn't much of a stretch because I'm a news junkie anyway. But let's see, in terms of like from the age of 7, I always wanted to do this. And I got an internship at Second City. I went to Ohio University. Pause for applause. Thank you. And then, yes, OU, a great school to leave. But they were kind enough to see the validity in giving me 12 hours credit for 10 hours, or 10 weeks at Second City. So, but I have, over the space of 30 plus years, I think it's a really exciting time. I mean, I have a lot to complain about my demographic. And I've been on I don't know if I've ever, here's the thing with me. My mother was one of the funniest people I've ever met. And so I've never been a part of that comedy is guys' night out. You know, I've never been ever, like you were saying about, you're initially surprised by people doing accents going, what the, and then you're kind of in retrospect offended. And so looking back on the shows we put up at Second City and other things, I've been in writers' rooms, you just go, you are damaged. You know, like the people trying to perpetuate, trying to legislate that. And like a little of what you were hinting at, Trevor, comedy is extremely powerful. You know, when you get it right, it's like it changes elections and people's point of view. And so it's not, you know, like I'm teaching here, I've learned, you know, imbue people with a sense of importance, like that you're learning something that is powerful. Right.
So from your early days as sort of content creators, I mean, Michael, you started younger than you because you started as a lawyer and you came to it later in life, right?
Yeah.
A little later in life. But when you were starting, you were interested in politics and Nixon and Watergate and all that stuff. Were there
Andrew Jackson?
Was there ever a time? Was there ever a time when you felt, no, you can't do that joke. You can't. The early days of Second City or even SNL. Was there stuff that was, you're going too far? That's.
Like when I arrived at Second City, the typical casting was 2 women and 4 men, and then they needed a change, so 2 women and 5 men. And I'm proud to say that I was involved in the very first cast that was 3 men and 3 women. And I mean, that's the incremental change, because I think they were afraid that the audiences would just flip out.
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't. You know, like people are very hesitant to change, and it makes them uncomfortable. And I think one thing about comedians is that that's where we live, or some of us, Lenny Bruce called it love me, hate me, where he would get on stage and he would say something that the audience would love, and then he would immediately say something that they hated. And there is that kind of like push me, pull you thing that I've watched over the course of my career. And but yeah, you're exactly right, Trevor, with the dicey, ever-changing
landscape
matrix
right now. Right now, but it's always been that way, but it's never been more dicey than right now, right?
From my experience.
So now is there stuff that offends either one of you? In other words, have you seen the new Chappelle?
Every single Trump tweet. I mean, Dave,
that should have gotten a bigger laugh.
I think one of the things.
All right, well, it took a while, but we're done.
That.
Yeah, you're misbehaving. You need to laugh more. That's always that's the problem with being political and topical. Is like you need to front load it with enough exposition that we can appreciate your point of view. So when you go to like an open mic and some awful comic comes off stage going, whoo, you know, like somehow he's talking above the audience's head, you know, like McDonald's, everything's Mick change. I'm so much better than the crowd. You know, tell yourself whatever you need to, but the gig is front-loading it with exposition so we can appreciate your point of view, I think.
Yeah, Fawzia, you're a comic, you're a content creator, producer, you're doing all this stuff out in the world, and you're very, you're taking on lots of institutions that are relatively, you're pioneering in a certain way. Is there stuff that you see that like just incenses you? Are there comics out there who are trying and like put them away? This is not okay.
Well, and I have to say that, you know, the thing that really impacted and changed my perception both of myself and of who I wanted to be and what I wanted to create was when I left the law. The job I took was to do a comedic sexual violence prevention show. I know, a funny show about date rape prevention. You know, and it's called Sex Signals. It's still around. It's one of the most popular sexual violence prevention shows in the country, in the world, and it was based in Chicago. And when I did that show, it was 2/3 comedy. It's shifted a lot and changed now, but it was 2/3 comedy, 1/3 really serious. But you'd use the comedy to get audiences on your you know, get them on the same page as you, and then you would have this really serious conversation about culture and date rape. And you know what I found through that was, whether it was a tiny community college in Kansas, an Ivy League school, or we also started doing military installations, every branch of the military, from generals to basic kids in basic training, what I found was that we were still, no matter what, we're all part of the same culture. And we all, the way to get everybody to listen was the laughter, was the comedy.
Yeah.
And also what I learned through that, I mean, it wasn't just doing a comedy show. I just really learned the things that I was also part of a culture that I wanted to break out of. I didn't want to call myself like, hey sluts, what's up sluts? Like, why do we do that? Is that funny? Like, I don't know. Is it funny? And, you know, that's what we did and what my friends did. And so doing that show, I realized I was socialized in a way that I didn't like anymore. And I learned about who I wanted to be, and I feel like I really learned to love myself in a very different way. And I also learned that I don't want to do comedy at the expense of somebody who is powerless. And so who is that? That to me, kids, like, you know, pedophilia isn't funny to me. Date rape, like rape, I just don't think it's funny. I'm like, it's just so awful. What is funny about it? And because usually there's ways to make, Ever Maynard, I can't remember what it, but she has a viral video she did, she's another Chicago comic, about like the rape joke, you know, and it was like, you know, it was a woman who's walking by an alley, and she's like, every time I walk by an alley, it's like, here's your rape. You know, it's like, because that's the fear of women. Like, that feels like a funny rape joke to me. But it doesn't feel funny when it's at the expense of the victim. And that's the barometer that I started gauging everything by. And I want, to me, it doesn't mean it's like PC comedy, but like, can't I be smarter than making fun of people who are traumatized? Like,
yeah,
like,
down.
Yeah, why punch down? I mean,
Right.
that is just what, I guess anyone can do that. What makes us better or smarter or funnier?
So, should those comics just not, should you choose not to watch them, or should they not be allowed to do what they're doing? I know it's a sort of a hot button question, but it's very relevant right now because Sean Gell, who's the SNL guy? That they
the Philadelphia
Fired.
Yeah, that they got fired, right?
That's his name.
That's his
Fired.
name. I don't know. It's just interesting because it's.
Well, usually a lot of times political correctness, like, you know, complaining about it, is an excuse not to grow. Like, I find that with some of my students, like,
None in here.
No, none of you. But the people that because I teach other places too. I'm talking about those other students, the unwashed students.
Yeah.
But
Understood.
the idea that somehow at 18, unencumbered by knowledge or experience, I am completely imbued with what's really funny. And then the other excuse that I love is that I'm being brave. By being racist or homophobic or misogynist, I'm actually being brave. And my response is, fuck off. Like and sort of as a straight white man who has worked at various comedy institutions, I feel almost a moral imperative to go, stop it. Like, not to put up with it anymore. You know, as kind of this, I don't know, ersatz mentor, going, this is, scatological is, and also bad is not innovative.
Right.
You know, you might think you're hysterical and your parents thought you were really funny, but, you know, shut up. You know, and also the idea of going from hobby to profession.
Yeah.
Take this into consideration. And so, and I try my best to, and sometimes gently, sometimes not so gently, but is to not put up with it, not at all. Like any hint of it, I try to call it for what it is, which is, you're very young. You know, you need to shut up and listen, you know, in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, the idea of like what someone should or shouldn't do, I think that's hard to say. But I think that, you know, just if we take it out of being on stage or doing comedy or writing comedy, just as like a basic tenet of being a human being, you know, what kind of human being do you want to be? And I know some people are like, it's so fluffy, but it's like, really, like, you have to be a person, you know, like being a person is really our number one job, right? Like that is how you survive. You be a person. Are you going to be a good person or a shitty person?
Yeah.
And I think part of being a good person is like things like the acts you do in your life, like how you treat people. And I think comedy is opportunity, you know, like it's not just this thing you do because, I don't know, I just think it's opportunity. It's art. And how good are you at your art? I don't know.
I had this experience that we're friends, my wife and I, who's Susan, who teaches improv. We were visited by Hannah Gatsby, the woman from
Australia.
Tasmania. Australia. Yeah. And I had watched her Netflix special the night before they came over to our house for breakfast. Jill Soloway and Faye Soloway and Hannah Gatsby. And I thought, what a magical house we have. We watched it on Netflix.
That's right. And
then they show up for breakfast. Let's keep doing this. And but one of the things about that special was I felt like a jazz saxophone player watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, because it really beautifully delivered the anguish of that. You know, the idea of having to deny that you were raped in order to make these jokes on stage. And it was like, oh my God, I so don't want to be opposite of that. You know, I want to be part of it. You know, I want to be part of the solution. And
I think that Hannah is such a great example because, I mean, so many comedians were mad at them for saying that what they're doing is comedy. And I just thought, how arrogant to say that this exceptionally talented, funny human being with a show that impacted millions of people all over the world is not doing comedy right. I'm like, fuck you. Yeah. Like, what is that about? Like, it just felt so self-serving and it's like, well, you know, I feel like that's part of the problem is that, you know, somebody has defined it somewhere. And of course, I think it's part of the patriarchy, you know, because that's, that's what I think. You know, I mean, look, I'm the same person who was like, where's the brown representation on television? And I was like, oh, it's Mindy Kaling and Apu on The Simpsons. And I'm the person who would watch Apu on The Simpsons and I'd be like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be him or marry him. So I was like, I'm going to be a lesbian. You know, like, you know, so it's just really, that conversation after Hannah Gatsby's special was fascinating. I just thought, you know what, if you could, instead of criticizing their work, try to put in the time and the effort and that focus to create something so special and impactful, and then let's talk.
What's interesting is I heard a little bit about that, her criticism, but you're in the comedy world. my takeaway from it was how amazing the show was. So this is also social media and how social media gets inside all our heads and sort of creates a narrative.
Yeah.
So you're angry about it, understandably, and I'm like, God, that was so good. Oh, really?
Yeah.
People had a problem with it?
Yeah, because they're
so
like, it's theater, it's not stand-up. And then I'm like, wait, all stand-up, anyone doing an hour special, that is theater.
Yeah.
You have.
Oh man, you bet it is.
It is
absolutely.
Yeah, right. Like
I produced a comedy festival in Ireland for 5 years called The Cat Laughs. Hold for applause. It's still going on, and that was what I learned producing stand-up was this is amazing theater.
Yeah.
I mean, when it's done, and what you were saying about like it changing minds. I remember, I forget who knew this, but somebody grabbed my arm and said, "You have to see this comic." This was in 1995. Eddie Izzard, so I stood at this little theater in Kilkenny, is where the festival is, and I was stage left, and he came on stage dressed in his Dressed to Kill outfit, and that bothered me for about 4 seconds. And then suddenly you go, and that's the thing about new experiences. You know, let them soak in and have it change you.
Well, the first time I ever did stand-up was here in Chicago when Cameron Esposito was running the room at, there's a bar in town, I forget what it's called right now, it's on somewhere in Logan Square. Coles. So she started doing this Coles open mic, and it was revolutionary because for the first time, at least that we knew of, in the city of Chicago, she was creating a room that was open and welcoming and positive energy. So it's like every new comic who came up there, instead of people just like being like, man, when's my set? Oh my God, what a lame first timer. This is bullshit. When, everyone would welcome. She created energy where it's like, how do we welcome first timers? How do we create a room of positivity so that we encourage people to come back and do this again and facilitate the success of all of us? That really impacted the amount of women or queer people or folks of color who said, oh, there's somewhere that maybe I can do this in. Maybe there's a support system in this place versus a place of fear. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that alone, it's like, wait, why do we want to have a place of fear? This world is fucking terrifying. Mm-hmm. I talk about Hollywood and I'm like, oh my God, it's like great and a pyramid scheme. Like, it is the worst, like why we want this thing, but it's scary and weird and it's not really safe. And so we don't need to create more unsafe places. We need more support systems.
Great point, yeah.
I hate to switch it to a most unpleasant subject, but it's important right now, getting back to the state of politics in this country and the importance of comedy. So for a long time, I was a news junkie. I think a lot of us were. And then this guy got elected, and I couldn't watch it anymore because I felt like something was being distorted, and I didn't want this person in my living room, and I felt like the media was trying to entertain me to death. And so I started watching late night comics, and that was my, lifeblood. I mean, that kept me alive. That sort of informed me what was going on. And then one day I couldn't watch that either. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's still going on. And so I'm curious about your guys' feeling about the ability to counteract big political movements, what's going on, and comedy, and how do you continue to batter at this, Well,
one thing I was diagnosed with I have cancer. I'm getting over cancer. I have what's called a glioblastoma in my spine, in the upper part of my spine. Not on it, which would be easier. Fucker. And so I went through a period where I couldn't watch anything. Like, I would turn on everything had to be gentle, and there couldn't be any arguing. Like, even the Great British Baking Show was too much. She lost. And any commercial with kids in it would just make me cry. And slowly I've gotten my cynicism back, you know.
Yeah.
But the thing with like sort of circling the drain and then slowly crawling back up the sink, so to speak, is you have, for me at least, I'm amazingly grateful to be alive. And so yes.
Don't hold applause.
Yeah, I'm for motherhood. But so from that perspective, I had to ignore it at first, and then I've kind of come to the party late. And my thing is just incredibly unoriginal in terms of tearing pages out of the Hitler rule book, in terms of calling things fake news and, you know, and shouting back all of it. I don't have to tell anybody in this room about this, but you go, this is... and I remember getting upset, and Katie Rich got upset with me when Trump hosted SNL, because I went on this tear about... You know, and then she tried to explain, you know, I'm sure you had bad people host when you, well, we did, but they weren't delusional. You know, they weren't narcissistic on a scale we've never experienced before. And so, I mean, on one sense, it's easy to make fun of. Yeah. And on the other sense, I remember a friend of mine said, in the 30s, everybody with a comb and a glass of water would do an impression of Hitler, and everybody laughed. And the thing that really got him was big, huge guns attached to aircraft carriers. You know, that's how you undo it when it gets that far along. After the business, you know, American fascism is business in bed with government. Ta-da! That's where we're at. You know, and the idea, and I think there's a moral imperative on the part of comics and satirists and humorists to address it. Yeah. Rather than just kind of go, you know, do the equivalent of putting your fingers in your ears and singing, you know.
Yeah, but it's hard. I mean, I know for young writers who are, you know, coming up during this period and looking at the news and the landscape of this country and the, you know, leader of this country who's amoral and, you know, inarticulate and anti-education and anti-intellectual, you know, how do you get your bearing and figure out what to write about and what to take on? And my experience at the Harold Ramis Film School is a lot of our students just want to write balls out comedy because it's like they don't want to address it, and I understand it. And I encourage them to address it, but you know,
well, it's a lot because you're like, what? How is this going to do a thing? You know, how's it going to do anything? I mean, I felt that way before, you know, the president was in office. He made this comment in December where he talked about, like, all Mexicans are rapists and Muslims should be banned. And nobody really took it seriously, right? I think this was in 2016 or 15. Was it in December 15? And so I thought, okay, well, I have no power. Nobody cares about what I think, but I need to do something. And so I made a mockumentary called The Muslim Trump, where I played Donald Trump's illegitimate Muslim daughter. Because I was trying to, and part of it was like, why is he so mad at us? Why does he hate Muslims so much? So I was like, oh my God, he must have fallen in love with a Muslim woman, gotten burned, right? And like, no, I mean, why else would he have built the Taj Mahal casino if not for the love of a Muslim woman? You know? And it was, you know, kind of weird and fun, and, you know, I got some great press out of it. And then, you know, some folks were like, you got to pitch this. So I pitched it to some, you know, spots in LA, and every single place said this. They said, you know, we think it did what it was going to do, and, you know, we could turn it into a show, but he's not going to win the election. So it's just it's not going to make sense. It's already done, and I think that's like the state of mind we were in, and we were sort of like, there was this ignoring of it for a long time, even right before he was elected, and then it got real serious near the end, but then it was too late. And now it is hard. I mean, I feel like I'm coming back to what can I do, but it's so overwhelming that we start to ignore, and that is when it's the scariest. Because we cannot ignore. We just can't. I was at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, in September in Toronto, and the film that I felt like gave me such great hope for what we can do with comedy was I saw Taika Waititi's new film Jojo Rabbit. And that film is basically, it's a satire. It's a young boy who's being trained to be a Nazi. So he's like 10. And this is based on what really was happening in the country at the time. He's being trained to be a Nazi in these Nazi camps. And his imaginary best friend is Hitler, played by Taika Waititi. And it seems insane. And it is, because it really happened. You know, like, we really had this man in power. And you know, one of the beautiful things, this isn't a spoiler alert, but he would use actual footage in this absurd, exceptional film, beautifully cast. His throwaway lines were funnier than most people's best lines, right? And I'm like, oh, this is a man at the top of his game of writing and satire, and knowing like the power he wields and can wield and the impact that he can have with this platform. But he would use, like, he was using archival footage of what was happening in Nazi Germany, and I'm like, oh my God, this is literally, like, how can we do this also here? You know, I mean, and that to me is like, fucking do that. Let's channel our Taika. You know what I mean? Like, that is beautiful.
Well, and one thing to keep in mind too about Germany is at the turn of the century, you know, 1904, it was the height of civilization.
Yeah.
You know, and then look where it went. So
Yeah.
it's like Thomas Jefferson said, you know, the price of democracy is eternal vigilance. And also standing up for and pointing when stuff is wrong. Like that's really, what are you going to, like, I come from a family that, you know, a lot of them have died from embarrassment. You know, rather than just express indignation, they're just, well, we're just going to not talk to them. Like, the Irish can hold a grudge, am I right? Like, just throwing these lines out. But they, you know, the idea of like, well, we're going to drive by snubbing. We're just going to drive by and, like, you know, and I think, you know, there are moments in history where you need to stand up and go, no. And so some of that, like, I try to do it. It's always inconvenient.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that's one of the other things I feel like changed my life about doing the sexual violence prevention work, was learning how to be a good bystander. And, you know, it might sound like kind of a cheesy term to some, but it's literally like how we can help each other not die, be better, and like not be hurt. Right? And it applies in all the situations. It's like, I mean, I've had plenty of my straight white dude friends who have been like, hey, dude, don't talk to her like that. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Yeah. Like, that was scary to me. Or I have stepped in and been like, don't fucking talk to my friend like that. And they're like, wow, she's small but loud. Cool, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. And I'm like, thank you.
What a great pitch, though. How not to die.
Right. I mean, I feel like, really, I'm just trying not to die. Like, every day I go anywhere, I'm like, I didn't die today. Right? Like, that is literally how I feel every moment. Like, because we really might. We don't know how long we have, and like, how can we help each other along the way? And I think comedy is a great example. And actually, when you think about stand-up, because stand-up to me is truly terrifying, and I have great respect for, you know, even folks whose comedy I don't like. It is not. That is a craft that it takes years of work, and it takes years of like embarrassment to get that good. You know, like, we're scared of all these other things, but like stand-up comics, I'm like, you had to get up there and nobody laughed at you so many times. Yeah. You told shitty jokes. It took you, you know, 2 years to figure out how to make that joke good. And people are willing to do that, but not step in and deal with the embarrassment of being a good person in some other situation.
Well, it kind of comes back to that Malcolm Gladwell thing about 10,000 hours to achieve expertise. And the idea, like, it goes with the territory. If you want to be good on stage, log a lot of hours on stage.
Yeah.
And that, like you, I have nothing but respect for the bare naked quality of making theater out of nothing. Yeah. And it's just, the best I can do, my background is improv, is introduce people. Yeah. Like that's compare, as they say in Ireland and in the UK. Compare.
It's important. I mean, you said, you know, we just need to be people and good people, and I assume most of the people here are interested in becoming writers, and you are, you've decided to throw yourself in as artists. And the question is, what is your responsibility as artists to make people laugh? Very important. In the face of, fascism, will you be the ones that, fiddled, or will you be the ones that, look and put it into your work and express injustice when you see it? And I think these two guys have, been doing this and successfully. And as much as laughter is important, it is important to try and defend human rights and injustice. And you have this rare opportunity right now, never more in the world. Any of you could make a video tonight and put it online, and then millions and millions of people could see it. And you have the choice of what that is, and how good it is, and how funny it is. But that's unbelievable. And that's the terrifying thing about what's going on right now, that Trump can Twitter constantly, or that the alt-right can create these fascist conspiracies, but you can combat it with your own content, and whether it's funny or poignant or whatever. Yeah.
One thing, just to add, like one of the beautiful things to me about Second City and Saturday Night Live is it's vignetted. So you can go, essentially in a running order at Second City, you can go dick joke, dick joke, dick joke, dick joke, indictment of the audience's lifestyle, dick joke, dick joke.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so right.
It's not like, I'm so sick of them yelling at.
Yeah.
And the other thing about political topical stuff is it is hard to write.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times there's people with the best intentions, but have a big goose eggs worth of ability to actually write jokes and create scenarios. And so the idea is, and maybe important to you guys, is study and sort of fail and learn and take into account the spirit of the times, and then you can make anything funny as opposed to just, my cats and dogs, am I right? Airline food. Come on.
So, right now, comics, anything you're watching, movie, you identify the movie that you saw.
Jojo Rabbit.
Jojo Rabbit. What are you really excited about? Who are you excited about? Is there anyone out there that you're sort of...
Well, Fleabag, for one. I was just really so delighted with, they didn't ask me anything, and they did something I really liked. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
And also Catastrophe is one of my favorite shows,
I
too. So
agree.
a lot of it, I particularly, after, misspending my youth working on 4-camera sitcoms and that, I'm so delighted to not have that, live sitcom rhythm of funny thing, more funny thing, really funny thing. And so let's see, so that would be my...
Yeah, that's pretty good. What do you love?
I
can't say Fleabag.
I know. I mean, can I just say Phoebe Waller-Bridge?
Yeah.
I just think she's such a fantastic example of that show. She wouldn't have been able to make that before because there wasn't that opportunity. Nobody saw, that kind of what I would call really strong feminist work. Which to me, feminism isn't just about women, right? It's about a way we talk about culture and people and treat people. Again, being good people, even if they're not always good people. Good people do bad things. And so I just think she's exceptional. I've been watching Dear White People. I'm watching I'm Sorry. I just thought that new season. I'm watching a lot right now.
There's a lot out there.
There's so much out there, and it's really hard to keep up with. But it's important because, when you go into a room and you're trying to sell a show, how can you sell your show when they're like, well, isn't that kind of like this other show? And it's like, fuck. What are they talking about? So you kind of have to consume this content, and there's a lot of it, but it's important to watch it to know. I mean, Pen 15, I just think
hilarious.
is exceptional.
Yeah.
Oh my God, just so much.
Yeah. We're going to go to Q&A, but before we do, your Trump thing is available on YouTube.
It is.
It's on your website, so I would recommend you guys go to it, check it out. There's a bunch of really wonderful things. A lot of great comedy, and as I learned recently, some really moving documentary stuff that you've done in Pakistan, which you guys should definitely check out. So
Thank you.
I'm a big new fan. And you have been, I'm an old fan. And you guys, we'll see how the questions go to decide if I'm a fan or not. Let's go to Q&A. Yeah, any questions, if you have any questions?
Oh, there we go.
Hi, Michael.
Hey.
I'm in your class
Yes,
right
I
now.
know. Thank
And
you
I was
for
actually going to ask about, like, my monologue that I have to write for Monday.
Wait a minute, is this a homework question?
Yeah, basically.
This is amazing.
Sounds like it.
So I was just wondering how you balance writing about, or, like, making something that's, like, so terrible and, like, awful really funny. Like, I wanted to write my monologue on my suicide attempt and how I'm still recovering from that.
Oh.
And I wanted to, like, somehow make that funny, which is a difficult line to
Sure.
walk.
Yeah, I would, well, these guys both, I'm sure, have much more helpful opinions, but my thing for those kinds of things is always to get in touch with the irony. And somewhere, and that's only known to you, really. And sometimes it takes journaling and kind of digging deep, and sometimes it's difficult to do. And if it's too difficult, as the instructor, maybe choose something else, and come back to it later when you're more equipped to it. Because there are things that I've learned from giving that assignment is to be very, very gentle with dipping into that kind of area for the first part. Because, like, think about if you guys were going to do a one-person show. That's kind of a good way to get in touch with your POV. Mm-hmm. It's like, what would that be? It wouldn't necessarily be psychodrama, but you would be able, because you want to take the audience on a journey with you. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of helpful to kind of set up the beginning, middle, and end for something like that. But I bet you get a good grade.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Yep. See you.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is that Michael told us that he had cancer, and within a second he got a laugh. So there's almost nothing you can't joke about if you're really smart and funny. And you connect with it. So, that came very deep inside Michael and probably lots of time to process. And now he has the ability to joke about it and get you to laugh about it. But it's so personal. Yeah.
Oh, just on the cancer
Was
thing.
I right about you? Did say you had cancer, didn't you? Okay.
I'm going to milk
I
that
heard.
for everything I can.
No, don't stop.
I'm going to, when I was first diagnosed, and I was in the hospital for a month, and then I came home, and I didn't want to email each of my friends and tell them what was going on, so I started something called Beloveds, and it was not political, which was a rare thing for me. I tried, I just talked about my emerging spiritual side, which was suppressed for years and years, and then I periodically, it may have been the opioids, but I was suddenly in touch with this brand new kind of thing, which I'm amazingly grateful for. And I just wrote about, I've maybe done 100 of them, and a friend of mine wants me to publish them. I don't know, I have to kind of think about that. But the idea is to, in 500-word installments, to sort of peg what you feel. And Second City, or improv, assume the audience is at least as intelligent as you, which under the umbrella of intelligence is empathy. Mm-hmm. And you will if and when you're brave enough to do this, you will change people because you're kind of going in on this subterranean entrance, as opposed to like what I was saying earlier about airline food. Am I right? That whole, even that 70s, 80s stand-up is just so laughable in the wrong way now because it lacks that. It lacks anybody could say it, where if you've been through it, we want to hear it. We really need to hear it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like you should definitely consider publishing Beloveds. I would love to read. Also, the opioids sounded like a band for a second.
My God.
And I think I've written and performed a one-person show that I'm now adapting into a screenplay. I'm currently on draft 4 right now. I feel really excited. It's taken a minute. But for me, like writing and art, I feel like really saved my life. You know, for me, like I came out through the creation of art. Like I didn't go and tell everybody I'm queer. I just started putting things on the internet or writing and making a film. And it was a really slow process. You know, my first short film was 3 minutes long. And if I didn't make that, I tell people still, like if I hadn't made that, I would have died. Because I didn't understand that I could be all of these things at once. It felt impossible to me. And there was no representation that I could turn to that made sense to me or felt safe to me. And I feel like, you know, maybe what I've learned through my work is there's folks who may not have the exact same experience, but plenty of people come up afterwards and say, you know, I don't know what that was like, but this other stuff you talked about, I relate to that. And I feel like there's so much in the story without knowing you or knowing your story. There's so much that is relatable about those feelings that I guarantee you the feelings that you feel, even if other folks haven't acted in the same way or reacted to those feelings in the same way, we've all felt something that you've felt. And so really connecting to that will open us up to connecting to everything else that you've gone through.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
The one thing I would quickly add is one of my recent revelations is we're here for 2 reasons, to learn some things and to help each other. And I feel like that cuts across everything. And so these experiences come up and you go, oh my God, why did I get cancer? Well, to do exactly what you're doing. You know, the idea is just suit up. Like and this will sound so weird, because I just personally can't afford cynicism anymore. I know I've joked about it, but the idea is I'm kind of grateful for getting cancer. And so for you guys, I mean, that's the thing, is what's the story that you have to tell? Like I had a student from England who said, a friend of hers talking about her pilot, why, not just why does this have to, like an urgency to why must this be created? That's really good to have that energy behind it, as opposed to a man with 3 cats who loves jazz, you know, befriends an airline stewardess.
Wait, this is really good. Wait,
yeah, I know.
I'm totally gonna watch this.
Yeah, that's right. Come off of you know, crazy neighbors coming to dinner.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Drew. Thanks so much for coming in to speak today. I'm wondering, when you're writing political satire, what's your view on timing in such like a rapidly changing environment when news is coming out all the time, and you got to take the time to structure what you want to say? What's that relationship for you?
Good question.
We're like,
all right. Okay, so I came up with this thing this morning. I'm going to have a friend of mine shoot it. And this is from my wife, who's way funnier than I am, like 4 or 5 times, like on an off day, about 3.8 times funnier, but normally 4.2. And, I want to do this thing. What I would do for her is put a pen in my mouth and pretend to be FDR, who, I don't know if anybody cares or anything, but his fireside chat. So I wrote this thing this morning, we'll see if I do it, but the idea of a fireside chat addressing Trump. Like, you know, an old dead president going, here's where you're wrong. Like, to me, one of the things that stands out.
It's working already.
Yeah. Am I right? I hate Eleanor.
blackout, like
yes.
that.
But you know, him calling himself a subtle genius. And so Roosevelt says, and this is what I believe, there are 3 things you can never do. Describe yourself as smart, describe yourself as funny, and give yourself a nickname. That those are all things other people give you. So when you describe yourself as a subtle genius, apparently FDR is upset about that, and stay tuned. But I would say, what is semi-topical? What stays around for a while? That's the thing to go after, just because of the production quality of it.
And I guess also, like, what medium are you creating it in? Like, is it a video that you're going to release on Instagram? Is it something that you're writing a feature? Is it what? I think that also impacts it as well.
Yeah, if you're like going to do the improv set at Second City, great. Or, do the open mic at Monday night. But, I'd love that immediately. Like an editorial cartoonist, that kind of immediacy.
Yeah, wow,
versus like something that can stick around for a while.
Great, thank you.
But just do it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. I think that about wraps up our our delightful hour. We could go on for another several, could we not?
Can we just have some soup and some whiskey?
Keep chatting. Fascinating. Thank you, guys. Lovely spending
Trevor,
the hour with you all. And
Laughing like Nancy Pelosi.